Hi everyone, Anna Shell here from TutorCore. So now we're going to dive into some specific approaches you can take in your sessions with your SAT students. So I'm going to share my screen. The first thing we're going to discuss is teaching strategy because it is the most important part of what you'll be teaching. So if you recall, we talked about the three elements of test prep being teaching students about the test, teaching students content, and then teaching them strategy being the most important piece. So a lot of you have tons of teaching experience, so this is going to be something you've probably heard before, but always keep in mind the easiest teaching tool to remember, the I do, we do, you do model. Make sure that you are, and that works very well for all the test prep teaching and tutoring that you're going to be doing with your student, modeling what they should be doing, how they should be approaching the test, helping them understand exactly how to do it, and then helping them to do it independently. Always be sure you're continuously checking for understanding as you're working with your students, providing little quizzes, helping them really retain the information as much as possible that they're learning. So I like to start off each session with a little quiz of reminders of things that maybe the students have learned in past sessions. So that's one way to do it, keep them fresh. So teaching strategies, so you'll be teaching 3 tiers of strategy. So the biggest umbrella tier is really just standardized tests taking strategy that can be applied to the entire test. So time management, guessing strategy, etc. And we'll be going through that in one of our videos. The next tier under that is how to approach each section strategically. So that is strategies that are section specific. And then the next tier under that is strategies specific to each particular question type. Within each section, students are going to encounter certain question types, and the students want to be able to understand the patterns and understand what to expect there. So some specific techniques that you can use to help students practice both with you and independently is one is to work with them on walkthroughs. So this can incorporate all 3 tiers of strategy and require you to demonstrate to a student how they might approach a particular problem or a test section, and then employ that I do, we do, you do method of teaching by first demonstrating a walkthrough, that is going through each practice question step by step, and then trying to approach similar practice questions together, and then having them do one on their own. And the Black Book dedicates huge sections to walkthroughs, and these are extremely valuable because they really help the student understand how to break down the process of approaching questions strategically. And you can be sure to show the student how to use these parts of the book to their advantage. You can have them read page 87 to understand more about the walkthroughs. You'll also be conducting some more straightforward strategy lessons, like the one you'll see later in later sections of this training. You can feel free to lift any of the lessons that we have in this training to teach your students. Always try and plan a walkthrough after a strategy lesson so they can see the strategy in action, and of course, make sure you're continuing to check for understanding. Another specific technique is conducting what are called post-mortem exercises. This is what they call them in the Black Book, which is essentially looking at the practice sets that students are doing for homework and or timed practice sections or timed practice tests, and examining all of the errors that students are making, where they might have gone wrong in a question, how they were fooled by the test maker into choosing the wrong answer choice, and making sure that they're not doing that again. So whenever you assign any sort of sets of practice problems to students during the course of their test prep, you should always help them conduct postmortems afterwards to understand the errors that they're making. Otherwise, the practice is kind of a waste of time. The stare and ponder method is essentially a very low-key way of approaching a practice problem by having the student try and look at a practice problem and just try and think through what's going on here. Ask them to break down exactly why the question is worded the way it's worded, why the answer choices are provided, including the incorrect ones, and really try and understand the thinking behind the architecture of the question and the answer choices, so that they start to get sort of in a deeper way, that they start to understand why things are framed the way they are and what the limitations of the test are. The shortcut search is another low-key way of looking at a problem and trying to figure out the fastest and most efficient way it can be answered. And then the final technique I'll discuss is the WWMIR technique, which involves looking at the incorrect answer choices and asking yourself, what would make these answer choices right? So mainly it's meant to help the students start understanding why the College Board includes specific answer choices to throw them off and what mistakes they're expecting students to make. We already went through postmortem, so I won't dwell on this for too long, but it's an extremely solid technique for helping students understand where they went wrong so they can prevent making the same mistakes in the future. And in the Black Book, you can also have them read page 38 to see common mistakes students will make section by section of the test. Feel free to pause here and read that yourself if you want to go through it now. You may actually want to have your students keep a journal of their errors. You could frame it as a test tack journal if you need to put a positive spin on it. But really, it's a way for them to start seeing patterns in the mistakes they're making and try and really put an end to them. So here's a sample of a strategy lesson you might do in a session. We always start with some review from a previous lesson. You can have the student read aloud a part of the Black Book, maybe the page 64, the big secret of SAT reading. That's a juicy one. Have the student describe a restatement and a demonstration in their own words, either in writing or just talking with you. Then you can have them try out a passage and question set, walking you through how they're finding the answers restated or demonstrated in the passage, and then go over any errors and note mistakes in their journal and assign homework and look through the calendar together. Okay, so this is the part that should be more straightforward, which is teaching content. Content is all the stuff in the SAT that's they're actually supposed to be testing for. It's surprisingly basic, mainly because they really need it to be as accessible to as many students as possible. So teaching content involves helping students understand specific topics, terms, and concepts in the areas of reading, writing, and math, science, and essay writing that they'll need to know to be successful. Just a reminder, just because the students mastered all the content doesn't mean they'll do well on the test. They need the strategy for that. But they also need the content. So teaching content may involve some rote practice. It may involve some quizzing. It'll probably require you to find some of the gaps by doing some quizzing and testing and filling those in. The good news is the Black Book has made finding that content very easy by providing toolboxes of topics, terms, and concepts from each section. So these should be approached as you would any other tutoring topic. And really, there should be a lot of practice involved making sure that the students are mastering all of those content topics. For kids who really need content practice, you may want to consider assigning some homework practice via IXL, EdHelper, Khan, or Quizlet. You can find topics in the Black Book pages and then create your own quizzes and tests with the help of online resources. We can provide these for you if you're having trouble. If it's becoming too time-consuming, we can help you with this. Just important to use all the resources you have available. So a sample content lesson would be maybe to start by testing the student on content covered in a certain, pages on the Black Book. Test them on any terms and concept they'll need to know. Make sure that they really understand it and are able to describe it on their own. Use a variety of approaches. Have the students self-check their work, go over any errors. You can create some practice around particular topics that are more challenging for them. You can mark particular Khan videos they can watch on their own time, and then walk them through some of the more challenging concepts in an I do, we do, you do exercise. In order to bring it back to the SAT, you can then show them how this content may appear in particular questions on the SAT, and then assign homework and check the calendar for the next session date. So Speaking of homework, let's talk about homework and when you'll be assigning practice and timed assessments. So you'll be working through the book section by section, focusing both on mastering strategy and on content for each section. After you've worked through all the sections, you should provide the student with a timed section test, and they can take the test outside of your session time and self-correct. Ideally, you'll conduct a postmortem together so that you can know the students really going through all of their answers carefully and understanding their errors. Homework, in addition to doing the timed section tests, homework can also include things like reading from the Black Book and taking notes, or reading and completing a set of practice problems, or walkthroughs and postmortem exercises, as long as they're writing all their steps down. And then occasionally you'll be assigning them full-length practice tests. So the timed section tests and full-length practice tests should be completed outside of session time unless the parent wants you to proctor. And again, ask us if they ask you to do this. And we can, if they're going to do the proctoring on their own, then we want to provide them with all the tools they need, and we're happy to do that. Just let us know. Save the actual session time for the harder stuff, like digging into strategy, identifying patterns, and working through the more challenging content. Accountability. So we talked about this a little before, but really important that you are helping hold the student accountable. If they're slipping on their homework, if they're not doing their time section tests as you assign, make sure to tell us, make sure to tell the family, make sure to keep everyone in the know, because they need to be pulling their weight if they want to reach their goals. Okay, so that wraps this video. We'll continue to throw in a lot of pointers about different ways that you can incorporate some of what we're teaching you into your lessons with students. But you can always hit us up if you have any question about what you're supposed to be doing in sessions with students, any strategy questions, if students are bored out of their mind and you need some help finding some games or something like that to make it more interesting. Please contact your manager, contact us, and we will get you set up. So next, we're going to start diving more deeper into the SAT itself. See you in the next video.